Hey everyone, welcome to the NextGen Study. We appreciate your time today. This year, we were especially inspired by major events in the 2025 news cycle, but also by your feedback and questions following our 2024 webinar. Our algorithms were quickly shaped by all the research we did on these two generations and how they see the world. I won't lie, Attica and I have spent the last few days discussing Instagram Reels and TikTok trends while preparing for today's session. So today we're here to share the key insights from a large-scale study that, as always, looks at younger generations through the lens of finances, work, the future, and mental health. This year, we added a focus on relationships and the social pressure that young people are experiencing. We often paint a negative portrait of younger generations without taking the time to understand their real challenges or how they actually feel. Before we get into the fun part, let us introduce ourselves. Go to the next slide, Attica. Okay. Just confirming we can see the next slide. Sorry, I'm not seeing it on my presentation. Okay, there we go. That's looking better. Sorry about that, everybody. Okay. All right. So my name is Jacob Jordan. I'm a research director with the Consumer Insights Division in Western Canada, based out of our Vancouver office, and I'm joined by my colleague, Attica.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Attica. I'm an analyst on Leger's Public Affairs and Communications team in Canada, Central Canada to be specific. Jacob and I are the millennial researchers here today to tell you all about the generations that are stealing our youth title, Gen Z and Gen Alpha. And of course, I say that with love. Thank you again for joining us here again this afternoon or morning, wherever you are. And as a reminder, you will be receiving a free copy of the full report emailed to you. This full report will contain even more data on each topic than what we will share in this presentation. You can also purchase a customized report tailored to your specific business or industry. So without further ado, let's get right into it.
Perfect. Thank you, Attica. And one more reminder before we begin, if you do have any questions during the presentation, you can use the Q&A chat feature, and we'll get to those after the presentation. All right. So as always with this study, our goal was to produce a quantitative portrait of these younger generations, especially by starting with a few big questions that may seem simple at first, but quickly turn out to lead to much more nuanced answers. So we asked ourselves, how do they feel? How do they connect? How do they see themselves? And how do they perceive the world? And how do they imagine what comes next? That's really what shaped the entire study. But first, some housekeeping. So for the methodology, I'll give you the big picture. We want to save as much time as possible for the real questions. So we surveyed 2,500 young people across Canada between September 30th and October 15th. And in our sample, we have a portion of Gen Alpha, that's the 12 to 15-year-olds who are the very first generation to be born fully within the 21st century, and Gen Z, the 16 to 29-year-olds who basically grew up with a smartphone glued to their hand. So overall, a large, well-distributed, well-weighted sample that allows us to present something very solid. And no, millennials are no longer a part of the study. We've been officially deemed too old to be considered the young ones.
I don't know about you, Jacob, but I'm still a Gen Z at heart.
Really? All right, so what does 6'7" mean?
Okay, I think you got me there. If any of you know, please do let me know because I've Urban Dictionaried this before and I still can't figure it out.
All right, so before we dive into the insights, we know you're probably thinking, who are these generations and how do they fit into the broader culture?
Okay, so the purpose of the NextGen study, the reason why we're so interested in the generations is that it's the variable that most strongly determines behaviors, even more than other socio-demographic variables such as origin, income, or parental status. I found that really profounding. You're likely already familiar with the generational labels shown on the screen, baby boomers, Gen X, and millennials. Past research has focused a lot on baby boomers or comparisons with millennials, and now our attention is shifting towards understanding the emergent behaviors and values of the younger generations, Gen Z and Gen Alpha. When looking at these younger generations, we first need to understand what we even mean by a generation. It's not just about age, it's about a group of people born in the same period who were shaped by the same or similar social, cultural, and economic forces, and who therefore develop shared values and behaviors. These values, behaviors, and needs then influence their attitudes towards life, especially when it comes to their views on the future, employment, and relationships. Gen Z grew up in a connected world where social media, diversity, and the rapid flow of information strongly shape their worldview. They value self expression, authenticity, and individuality. Alphas were born into a fully digital environment where AI is becoming increasingly present. They develop remarkable technological ease at a very young age and expect personalized, playful experiences. Ultra connectivity doesn't apply only to alphas. Gen Z has never known a world without social media. These two generations are the first to have built their identities as much online as in real life, and this constant exposure to the outside world certainly has an impact. So last September, our colleagues Boris, Maurice, and Alan presented our digital study, which focuses on the trends in the use of social media and digital platforms. One data point particularly caught our attention. 36%, that's just a little more than 1 in 3 young people, say that the web is actually a source of stress for them. This finding strongly resonated with us because in a 2025 edition of the NextGen study that we're presenting to you here today, we learned that ultra connectivity is actually the source of many issues affecting both Gen Alpha and Gen Z.
And that's exactly where our first key finding comes in. When we went through our results to understand how these younger generations really feel, we quickly realized that ultra connectivity doesn't come without consequences. Young people today are juggling a lot at the same time. Think back to your own teenage years or your first steps into adult life, the day-to-day pressure, constant comparison, that feeling that you always have to perform, all of that in a world that already moves so fast. Now imagine going through all of that with social media and the news cycle layered on top of that. And despite all this, these young people still manage to keep some balance, move forward, stay clear-headed, and that's largely thanks to their resilience. In recent years, we've heard a lot about major mental health crises among younger people, and we've contributed to that conversation too. Every year, we talk to you about how likely young people are to describe themselves as anxious or depressed. But every week, there seems to be a new headline. Young people are more anxious, more isolated, more depressed. Stories about loneliness, distress, and depressive episodes, both here and around the world, some of which we've added to the screen.
So one of the headlines on the bottom really grabbed my attention. And Jacob, I want to ask you, is the cure to male loneliness really out on the pickleball court?
Yeah, I think I'm a bit of a research nerd for pickleball. My cure to loneliness is Dungeons and Dragons.
Okay, that's fair.
The public narrative puts a huge spotlight on younger people's struggles, and that's part of the reality we're living in. But the good news is that when we ask them directly, the picture's a little bit more nuanced. It's not all negative. Because yes, and this matters, 77% of young people tell us they're happy. That's a lot. So it's not a completely bleak portrait. We've been saying it for years. Young people are more in tune with their emotions, for better or for worse. So that's reassuring, but at the same time, 37% say they are lonely at least once a week. 49% have gone through periods of depression. And here we see a 4-point increase among alphas and a 13-point increase among Gen Z compared to last year. And 75% have already experienced anxiety, with increases of 9 points among alphas and 4 points among Gen Z since last year. So we're really looking at a mix of emotions here. They can be happy and go through difficult moments. The two can and do coexist.
It's really a powerful lesson in resilience that these two generations offer us, but that resilience rests mostly on their own shoulders.
Yes. And because they're so in tune with their emotions, there's also a reflex that's becoming very common among young people, something that we may have not have seen as much in previous generations. And that's turning to support tools, especially now that online help technologies make it so accessible. So this next metric is the one that shocked me the most as a millennial presenting this. Uh, we have almost 1 in 2 young people who use or have already used AI or a digital app to help with their mental health. That can mean trying to understand what they're feeling, managing their anxiety, looking for comfort, or just having a place to vent. 40% have used ChatGPT, plus another 15% who indicate they're interested, and 23% use or have used mental health apps, plus another 24% who are interested. It's almost as hard to find reliable data on access to mental health professionals, though, as it is to actually get an appointment with one. But based on the available data, we estimate that roughly 10% of young people consult a mental health professional, which includes doctors, social workers, and psychologists. In that context, online resources can actually feel pretty appealing. We see technology as kind of becoming a first reflex, a space where they can drop what they're feeling. But of course, it does have its limits because, as we've seen in the news, while AI is practical and accessible, it can't replace a real human presence, especially when someone's in distress. The cases that have made headlines remind us of this. In certain situations, AI can even become dangerous if it's used as the only source of support. So, yes, young people turn to these tools, but it also shows how important it is to be cautious and how real their distress can be. And all of this leads us to one last important element when we talk about their mental health, and that's their relationship to their phone. 75% of Gen Z say they spend too much time on it. And 56% tell us that even with all their online interactions, they still feel lonely. So it creates kind of this double bind. The phone that connects them also exhausts them. It brings them closer, but also creates distance. And more than half interact as much, or even more, online than they do in person with their close friends. That's definitely true for me these days as well. This is really the heart of the finding. A lot of emotions, a lot of pressure, but also huge ability to recognize what they're going through and try to cope with it. So, what we see in this first finding is a real paradox. They've never been so connected, and yet they've had such a hard time feeling truly connected. And that's the core of our next finding.
So, with the Alpha and Z generations, we seem to be witnessing a kind of crisis of deep connection. I mentioned it earlier. These two generations were practically born with a smartphone in their hands. Many of us remember when your internet made that dial up noise and when someone else in your house picked up the phone, everything crashed. Well, Gen Alpha will never know this pain. They have only ever known a world where they can communicate with anyone at any moment. And yet, many of them feel lonely and actually wish to return to real in person interactions. We'll get more into romantic relationships in this section, but this desire for real relationships and interactions can extend to all relationships in your life. The desire for deep and authentic connections is present in friendships and family relationships just as much as in romantic ones, but we took a closer look at the latter. Dating apps have completely disrupted the norms around romantic encounters. For many of us, meeting someone meant actually leaving your home, making eye contact, and having a face to face conversation. But for more than 10 years now, a soulmate can be found right at your fingertips. You can meet someone while you're scrolling on your phone in your pajamas in the comfort of your own home. In fact, half of Gen Z has already been on all of the Tinders, Bumbles, and Hinges of this world. If you don't have an online dating story yourself, you've probably heard of some interesting ones from your friends, family members, or colleagues. That said, data shows that it's not always the most successful way to actually meet someone. In fact, 69% have actually had a romantic relationship with someone they met at school, at work, or somewhere else in real life, compared to just 32% through a dating app. Many experiences have been unsuccessful, adding to the digital fatigue that is already present in other parts of their lives. Despite their high usage, dating apps don't seem to meet young people's need for real connection. Among users, 2 in 3 say that dating apps sometimes actually create a feeling of loneliness despite having plenty of matches. It's the disappointment and distress of swiping on so many faces and names without ever finding the right person for you. That said, 3 out of 4 users wish relationships would go back to real life, showing a clear desire among younger generations to connect beyond their devices.
And in reality, we're seeing more and more app boycotts, as well as the return of events like in-person dating, like speed dating, inspired by the early 2000s trend. And it's not only for romantic relationships as well. You also see it in friendships. I know plenty of colleagues and friends that are partaking in grandma hobbies, going to book clubs and knit clubs, and even as far as some people meeting up to go for more athletic groups like run clubs or daily swims in the ocean all throughout the winter. Yikes.
Absolutely. Thanks for adding that, Jacob. And the insight that Jacob just mentioned is actually a very powerful one. We have marketers, people from the education sector, and HR professionals all here today, to name a few, and this can apply to all of you. Creating opportunities for young people to meet in person with others who feel like them can be a very powerful lever to build a sense of belonging towards your brand or organization. So, for example, if you're a restaurant owner, this could mean hosting more themed evenings or in-person social events. What we can take away from the data on romantic relationships is that Gen Z uses dating apps more out of obligation than genuine choice. In a world where people are working remotely or attending online classes, where in-person hobbies are being replaced by screen time, they just don't know how to meet someone else. So it feels like a mandatory next step, especially when they believe that everyone else is out there on these apps. There's a sort of fear of missing out if they're not. For those who are looking for love, and yes, that's actually still the majority if you're wondering, this adds yet another layer to their digital fatigue. In fact, whether they use them or not, half of Gen Z feels that dating apps are essential for meeting new people today. Yet, 4 out of 5 young people prefer meeting someone in another setting, whether at work, at school, through mutual friends, and so on.
This is another powerful insight too, Attica. When thinking about the practicality of this for your business, if you're in CPG or just any other retailer, it can mean producing commercials that show or give a sense of community or belonging to better connect with these younger generations. And for specific industries, whether you're in insurance, education, sports, PR communications, an agency, the idea is the same to showcase real life human experiences, stories, and testimonials, not just all the picture perfect you might see on social media or in ads today. Because the picture perfect that younger generations have been exposed to in this digital world has begun to reach a boiling point, and that's going to lead us to our next section. The digitization of interactions has had a fairly negative impact on young people's friendships, romantic relationships, and family relationships, but also on the closest relationship they have, and that's the one with themselves. That relationship is heavily shaped by what they experience online. Because beyond relationships with others, there's a whole question of self-image, and that's an area where Gen Z in particular is extremely vulnerable. When we ask them directly how they see themselves, it becomes immediately clear that appearance takes up a huge emotional space in their daily lives. 76% of Gen Z young adults tell us they've experienced a negative emotion related to their appearance in the past year. So that's enormous. And even among younger ones, the alphas, we're still talking about 1 and 2. What's also important to emphasize is that these emotions aren't tied to gender. Yes, unsurprisingly, the numbers are higher among young women, but 65% of young men also say they've experienced a negative emotion related to their appearance. So when we dig a little bit deeper, it becomes clear why. We can move to the next slide there. Perfect. Thank you. Younger generations have literally grown up under constant scrutiny. That's from their peers, but even more from social media. More than half tell us that social networks have had a negative impact on their self-esteem, and 63% say that sometimes they feel the need to change their appearance, and that's to match what they see online. So whether that is through working out, cosmetic procedures, or even just filters, young people are feeling a need to change. And yet, when we look at current trends, you might think we've entered an era of where everything is more authentic or more natural. But the reality is a bit different. The trends above uh, put the pressure or prove the pressure isn't going anywhere. Social media speeds up the trend cycle and multiplies it, making it harder than ever to keep up. And that pressure hits both young men and young women. Whether it's the return of extreme trends, viral beauty standards, or hyper-edited content, appearance has basically become a full-time project. We have many examples on the current slide of some current fashion trends that we've seen online recently. You should all see a poll popping up on your screen, so let us know which of the following fashion trends that you have tried. After you choose your answer, please hit submit.
You know, Jacob, it doesn't make me feel too bad that Y2K is a retro trend now.
It makes me feel older than I should. I don't mind the baggy jeans coming back, but they're a lot more comfortable than the skinny jeans we were wearing 10 to 15 years ago.
So we're just waiting for everyone to send their responses in.
Excellent. So while we wait for that one to come in, I think we can move on, Attica.
Yep, so we will share the results with you. What strikes me the most among the trends that you saw on your screen is that some of them, like the clean girl aesthetic, that come off as natural, young people know perfectly well that they're actually not very natural, and yet they still feel the pressure to follow them. They laugh about it sometimes, but it doesn't change the fact that it weighs on them every single day.
Yeah, we have our results in too as well. Looks like uh, we don't might not have a lot of Gen Z and Alpha in the audience because the number one trend that has been tried is none of these. But as Attica just mentioned, the clean girl aesthetic, the more natural looking trends are in the top three, and as well as sustainable. All right.
Thank you for sharing,
So,
Jake.
yeah, no worries. So, beneath all the self-love, acceptance, and positive messaging we see online, the insecurity is still very real, no matter the gender. We see it across the board: lower self-esteem, appearance-related anxiety, constant comparison with friends, with influencers. A huge proportion of young people experience this, and it shows just how much their relationship with themselves is being tested. So when Attica and I talked about the impact of the digital world on relationships, this also includes this relationship as well, the one that they have with their own image, their own worth, and the way they compare and judge themselves every day. And that's where we realize something important. Despite the new messaging, the new aesthetic codes, the pressure around appearance has not disappeared. It's just simply changed.
It's quite surprising to see that Gen Z and Gen Alpha haven't managed to free themselves from the appearance-related pressures experienced by us millennials, who were exposed to the extreme beauty standards of the early 2000s. Hello, Paris Hilton, Christina Aguilera, and Lindsay Lohan. But we should avoid falling into the trap of accusing Gen Z and Gen Alpha of being fundamentally superficial or overly focused on their image. Of course, part of the critical eye that they cast on themselves is personal. However, we found that when 73% of young people surveyed believe that appearance plays an important role in social and professional success, they're clearly telling us that the pressure largely comes from the outside. And this pressure is exponentially amplified by social media.
When you think about it, the days of anonymously dropping off a resume are over. Your appearance is always available online, and if you're an employer, you'd probably think twice about hiring someone without knowing how they present themselves. Just think of the age that these younger generations are living in. Think of LinkedIn. Your image is widely available, and maybe that's part of the puzzle about why young people are today are so conscious about appearance, especially within a professional setting.
That's right. And social pressure amplified by social media, it doesn't just stop at appearance. 69% of young people surveyed say that social media makes them feel like everyone else is doing better than they are. And an even larger proportion believes that social media platforms present an unrealistic picture of professional success.
It's true that platforms like LinkedIn can be fantastic tools to stay informed about our network's professional milestones, but it's also very easy to feel inadequate or not good enough when you see yet another former colleague getting promoted.
Right. So, for example, on social media, we've all seen those influencers who post their morning routine. They say they wake up at 3, 4, 5 a.m., drink their green juice, go for maybe a half marathon run, workout, all before their 9 to 5. But how many people in real life do you know that are actually doing that? I mean, most of us are happy just to be able to get breakfast in before we start work on time. If you have kids, you're happy just to be able to drop them off to school and get their hat and gloves on, right? So I'd say the standards on social media are not just high, they're pretty unrealistic. And in our day-to-day lives, it's easy to forget that on social media, we mostly see the good moments of other people. No one really posts their mistakes at work or in real life. Those things can easily be hidden. So what we can take away from this section, and we'll expand on it a bit later, is that young people are constantly torn between wanting to stay true to themselves and aligned with their personal aspirations and values, and the pressure of external judgment. All generations have faced this tension, of course, but Gen Z and Gen Alpha experience it 24/7 and from a whole lot more people because of hyperconnectivity. For example, the majority, that's 74% of the youth that we surveyed, say that work-life balance is more important than professional success. Yet many still feel a sense of guilt when they take time for themselves instead of focusing on advancing their careers. Caught between mental overload and a search for meaning, Gen Z and Gen Alpha are navigating a world that never seems to slow down. I mean, they literally grew up during a pandemic. At all times on their screens, they're seeing wars, scandals, fake news, and polarization. Alpha males and their return to traditional values have received a lot of attention over the past year, raising questions about the place and role of women at work, among other things. You've probably heard of Andrew Tate and the Red Pill community. If you haven't, just ask your Gen Z family members or colleagues.
We're also starting to see the pendulum swing back on some issues, with news stories, like you see on this slide, some witnessing a rise in homophobia among teenagers, with some 2S LGBTQ plus Canadians even fearing that their rights will start to roll back.
So you can only imagine how saturated their worldview is with contradictory discourse. As a result, Gen Alpha and Gen Z scrutinize and question progress that we once took for granted. And this search for meaning shows up very clearly in their relationship with information. Young people are constantly bombarded with opinions, hot takes, polarized content, but they're living all of this in a context where they don't really know where to go anymore and check what's true and what's not. They're worried about misinformation. 72% of youth tell us that outright they don't have reliable reference points left to validate what they see. And yet, contrary to what we might assume, they don't just swallow everything that they come across. They watch it, they filter, and they sort it. So, in a world where the algorithm decides what we're shown, they decide what they keep. And that's where their relationship with platforms gets really interesting.
And this is where we see that young people today, they're not naive. 3 out of 4 know that algorithms shape the world they see. They're also very aware that when most of their information comes through social media, which is the case for many of them, it becomes much harder to cross-check their sources. It's something we had already seen in our special report on youth and politics. When news articles are no longer pushed on platforms, validating information becomes extremely complicated. But instead of disengaging, they've developed strategies. Nearly 80% have unfollowed an account to protect their mental health, their worldview, or to simply just avoid overload. So the relationship with information is deeply marked by mistrust. But it's not just passive mistrust. They don't just absorb information, they're filtering it. And that filter, that vigilance, is directly shaping the world they see and the way they engage.
And because Gen Z and Gen Alpha are so aware of how algorithms work, they've shifted where and how they search for trustworthy information. Interestingly, the first step isn't I'll Google it, but it's let me check TikTok. So for businesses, strong digital outreach is essential along with transparency. Digital outreach could look like 30-second videos on how credit works or how insurance works, for example. This meets youth where they're already searching. Airlines can partner with creators to share travel tips, and CPG and retail brands can use quick demos or authentic user testimonials to connect more effectively. Transparency, on the other hand, could mean maybe a free trial period for a service or product. In CPG, adding QR codes that explain ingredients honestly and clearly. For airlines, this could be sharing real-time delays and clear compensation information.
Right. So moving on to a fun topic, politics. We see that young people aren't disengaged, they're demanding. We're living in a time where misinformation spreads quickly and traditional reference points are fading. But our data shows that young people refuse to get swept up in that. 69% look up more information when a topic catches their attention, and 59% are willing to sign a petition, and almost half would take part in a protest. This isn't political apathy, it's very concrete, very clear eyed, and a very selective form of engagement. We already saw it during the last federal election. Young people are living through a real crisis of representation. They're not disengaging from politics, they're disengaging from institutions that don't speak for them. Observe, understand, act. That's how they enter political life. And this way of seeing the world shows up just as clearly in their relationship to the economy, to work, and success. When it comes to the economy, young people aren't idealistic, they're extremely rational. 89% say making money is important, but it's no longer the ultimate dream for them. For them, making money is a means, it's not an end. As Attica mentioned earlier, 74% tell us that maintaining their quality of life matters more than professional success does. That's a major shift. We see it even in the workplace. Lack of flexibility has become one of the top reasons for changing jobs, and that number has jumped by 13 points since last year. So, in practice, if you work at an organization that has mandated back to work policies, you can expect hesitation or pushback from Gen Z employees specifically. We also asked what financial success actually means to them, and the answer is crystal clear. For half of them, it's the freedom to live the way they want, and for 40%, it's stability. We can really feel a return to what you would call an ethic of enough. No need to overdo it, no need to chase extreme wealth, just enough to live well, breathe, and stay in control of their life. The days of millennial hustle culture are over. And this very clear-eyed view they have of the world explains a lot about how they think about the future. Young people aren't trying to reject the system. They see its flaws, yes, but they're not looking to tear everything down and start over. They want to repair it, adjust it, improve it without going backwards. So the real question becomes, how do they see themselves moving forward in this world? What are their expectations? What are their ambitions? What are their reference points for what comes next? The first thing that we see, contrary to the stereotypes, Gen Z isn't looking for adventure or volatility. They're looking for stability. 61% want a stable, linear career in the same field. So we're far from the idea that they want to jump from one project to another. Gen Alpha, on the other hand, they're younger. They're still figuring things out. 32% don't yet know how to imagine their career path, which I would say is completely normal at that age. But Gen Z, they want to anchor themselves. They want something coherent and secure. And that desire for stability also shows up in how they think about work and education.
The relationship to work isn't the only dimension that's evolving. The way that young people view education is also changing. Interestingly, I found this very profounding. 72% of young people believe that a university degree no longer carries the same value on the job market that it once did. That's very significant and a very clear message. Youth are divided when it comes to the perceived value of education. For some, a bachelor's degree is just not enough. They aim for graduate studies and eventually accumulate professional achievements to stand out. Let's remember that many of them feel professional pressure because of social media. And for others, this perspective comes from the perception that you can earn a good living without higher education at all.
Exactly. You can think about all the influencers you see online, specifically social media, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok. There's new ways for these generations to start making money that they don't necessarily need an education for. Either that or a master's degree is the new baseline. A bachelor's is just not good enough.
Right. So the youth are not necessarily rejecting education altogether, but they see it as less of a guarantee and more as a tool among many to help them get where they want to go in life. This questioning of their reference points, such as the value of a diploma, is part of something broader. Young people are moving forward with a vision of the future that is realistic. This is not to be confused with resigned, and that reflects a constant revisiting of established norms. They have lived through so many crises that they've become used to them. When asked how they see the coming years, most expect major disruptions on the environmental or political front. In fact, 66% of youth anticipate significant changes in these areas. But we're talking about anticipation and adaptation, not acceptance. These disruptions remain sources of anxiety. Take, for example, the rise of AI. 55% tell us that it worries them in relation to employment. And this is even more true among young members of Gen Z who are already in the workforce. So we're really looking at a generation that wants to move forward, one that must constantly adapt. And adaptation is really an important word here. In a context where you're forced to take things one day at a time, planning for the future can be difficult. Nearly 70% of young people say that they live in the present moment because they don't know what tomorrow will bring, carpe diem. But this is realism. It's not fatalism. It's a way of moving forward with their eyes open. Young people are aware of the economic, climate, and technological challenges ahead, but their clear eyed view doesn't paralyze them. In fact, it pushes them to adapt. So, when we talk about the economic future, the first reality that young people are facing is the cost of living. And this may come as no surprise. 43% of Gen Z live paycheck to paycheck. This number has decreased since 2022, but it still remains concerning. So, it's no surprise that 61% of youth cite the cost of living as their main concern. The environment, social inequalities, and other issues aren't at the forefront of their minds. They're just trying to get by and survive.
Yeah, that's absolutely something we see in a lot of other studies as well. And this is something I would know firsthand as a former Vancouver resident, and the rest of BC is not much better.
And in Toronto, we're not so far behind with these cost of livings. Okay, so in this context, youth's relationship with money is very down to earth. Surprisingly, generations Alpha and Z aren't really dreaming of a big house, a cottage, a boat, or a convertible. I mean, at least not the majority of them. For youth of this generation, wealth equals freedom. The freedom not to hold back, to enjoy the fruits of their work, to breathe a little in daily life that's becoming increasingly expensive. Their ideal isn't really to own everything, it's just to live comfortably without guilt.
Exactly. So, what this could mean in practice for financial institutions, for example, replacing traditional success ideas like a big house, luxury car, more money with freedom and stability, which is what they value more. This could be a focus on budgeting tools, flexible credit options, and no-fee accounts for customers. Or when it comes to airlines, consider introducing interest-free payments. We see the likes of Klarna, Affirm, Afterpay. This allows more freedom and flexibility to generations that don't expect to own everything or even expect to own a little.
So what we can take away from this extensive initiative is that this, yeah, many young people feeling anxious, depressed, or lonely? Yes, I'd actually say far too many. But they're not unhappy. They've simply been taught to identify both positive and negative emotions and to fully experience them. And emotionally, they go through a wide range of feelings every single day. Ultra connectivity brings high expectations. They often enforce on themselves, which can sometimes be hard to navigate, but they're learning.
This portrait of the next gen ends where it began, with lucidity. They don't believe that everything will be fine, but they know they can do better. And that's probably the most mature form of optimism that one can have in 2025. So, with that, we are at the end of our presentation today. We'd like to remind you that you're going to get the full free report. It'll be sent to you via email. The full report contains even more data on each specific topic that we discussed today and more. So that includes things we didn't have time to cover. And if you want to know differences broken down by gender, age, generation, or learn more about AI, the full report will have that for you. We also offer customized analysis, so you can contact us if you'd like to see custom cuts of data or different breakdowns like specific regions, for example. All right. So thank you for being here today. We are now open to your questions and comments. So we'll get some of those going.
Feel free to use the Q&A. I see some questions in there.
Okay. So starting off, uh, you mentioned that young people today face more pressure related to their appearance than previous generations. And do you have any comparative data with other generations? Yeah, so this is a question we receive basically every year. The short answer is that we're limited in our ability to make comparisons with other generations. That's mainly because the study focuses as much as possible on understanding today's youth. The choice of topics like AI and social media makes that especially difficult, if not impossible, to obtain comparable data to previous generations.
So I see a question. How do these generations define depression and anxiety? I think these words may commonly be used now, but don't actually recognize a diagnosis. Do you have any insight? That's a great question. So we can actually look at how we define that in our study, but we will make a note of this question and we'll get back to you. We do have your email address for contact in the further. I just don't have the exact definition or what we used for the study.
Okay. Um, Hey, so I have another one. You touched on some online habits, but what I'm looking for are more details on which platforms they're using, types of content they like online. So in the NextGen study, we do focus more on how youth feel about online activity and relationships. So if you're looking for more details on specific platforms, you can check out our digital study, which we mentioned in the presentation as well. That came out in September. That report's free and on our website as well. You can also contact our team if you want more information or other data available in other studies.
Okay, so I have another question. Do you have any data on interest in marriage? People say these generations will get married much less often. So we did not explore this. That's a very interesting and good question, but we did not ask this in this study.
Yeah. And then we have one more here on the effects of Bill C-18, the Online News Act, which is the one about the withdrawal of accredited news outlets from meta platforms. So we did not explore that by recollection here, but that is certainly something that I would imagine anecdotally is having an impact on younger generations' abilities to cross-check and reference their sources. So definitely something interesting to look more deeper into in the future.
Okay, so we're getting some more questions in. What data did you, so this is a good question. What data did you find most surprising and why? Jacob, did you want to answer this one? Because I know we were discussing this
Yeah.
earlier.
Yeah, I mentioned it in the part of the presentation there, but that one with about half of younger people using AI for mental health issues completely floored me. It's not even something I thought of, and I just missed the cut for Gen Z, so I was really, really surprised to see that one. But I think with the context that it's super hard to find a mental health professional these days, the best estimate we can give you is 10% can actually speak to someone. So talking to AI, I'm a little less surprised now that I've sat with that metric, but it was definitely shocking at first to see that.
Okay. Another question, is there a list of the top platforms that these generations use to seek out information? So in this NextGen study, we focused more on how youth feel about their online activity and relationships. If you're looking for more details on their specific platform usage, what they're using more, check out our digital study, which came out in September. The report is free and it is available on our website. You can also contact our solutions team. We'll post their info after this if you want more information on other data available in our other specialized studies. I'm actually getting a lot of questions about, I think, and questions that could be answered through other specialized studies. So again, reach out to our solutions team and you can access the free report on our website.
Hmm. Okay. Are there still lots of differences between young men and young women? So that's not always a clear answer. We mentioned earlier we see lots of news stories about men, loneliness epidemic, the pickleball court, and then women and self-esteem. They do face different challenges. I think it's fair to say some of these issues are important no matter the gender. Um, there is more information throughout the report as well. We do break it down by men and women. Um, According to our data, women are also lonely, and men also feel pressure to look a certain way. So they are kind of starting to amalgamize a little bit. So there's definitely nuances, but there's nuances to the differences, and you can find out more about that in the report.
Okay, I think maybe just a couple more questions. We don't want to take too much of your time, but I'm seeing a couple of questions here that are asking about comparisons. For example, young people facing more pressure related to their appearance compared to previous generations and other comparisons to previous generations, and asking if we have comparative data. So this is a great question. We receive this every year. The short answer is that we're limited in our ability to make comparisons with other generations, mainly because the study focuses as much as possible on understanding today's youth. So the choice of topics like a lot of the ones that we discuss, social media and AI, make it difficult, if not impossible, to obtain comparable data from previous generations.
Okay. And then I see one more here about what living in the moment means for these generations. Is it spending time in person with friends, enjoying hobbies, impulse purchase, etc.? We don't have a specific breakdown on that either, but that's definitely some of the takeaways and implications from various different insights throughout the report. So there's much more information available to you in that report you'll receive on that as well. Anecdotally, again, I see a lot of people enjoying various different hobbies. Uh, in person was a huge theme throughout the report, so that's definitely likely the case. Impulse purchase didn't see as much or ask about that, but definitely interesting to think about the implications about how they're spending their money. They don't expect to earn things necessarily. So where is that, or sorry, they don't expect to own things necessarily like big purchases. So where is their money going and what are those impulse purchases? It's a great question.
Okay, maybe one more, Jacob, and then we are getting a lot, but for the sake of time, we'll take one more.
Okay, let's see.